My name is Karen, and the title that I've been given to talk to you about is Living a Naturally Supernatural Life Through Missional Communities. And I feel really excited about talking about this topic because for me it just really speaks about the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where it talks about making disciples of all nations and seeing many people both in and out of the church just get to be impacted by the kingdom of God, and that really excites me, and that's what we're all here for. So, a little bit about me. I'm part of King's Arms Church with Simon, and I'm part of the staff team there overseeing our missional communities and our life groups. And part of that was researching them and looking about how we would launch them within our community and just really equip the church on how to be naturally missional and seeing more and more missional communities start within our community. And the best bit about my job is that I just get to see people discover their gifts and their passions and discover what God is saying to them, and then actually just get to be part of the process of helping to see them live out their calling. And it's just so much fun. So a little bit about me personally. I've been a Christian for most of my life, bar a few years as a teenager where I had a little detour, but God very, very kindly drew me back when I was about 19. And I just love Jesus so much. I love his presence. I love that we get to worship him. I love that we get to encounter him, and that we just get to see him use us to bring his kingdom and to impact people. It's just so fun. And I also love coffee. You know those people who are a little bit of a coffee snob and are very particular about how they have their coffee? That would be me. It's been known for me on occasions to take my coffee back to the shop and say, oh, you haven't made that right, can you make it again? In a loving way, of course. But I definitely believe that life is too short to drink bad coffee. So good coffee is what it's all about. And what I'm discovering is that actually everyone in the church fundamentally wants to see the kingdom come. It's actually intrinsically in us all. But what also I'm realizing is that not everybody actually knows how to do this. But it's actually really simple, and actually it can be really natural for everybody. So my hope today is to show you how simple it really can be and how this practically looks within our church by sharing with you what missional communities look like and what it looks like for us to live supernatural life through them. And hopefully then how we can equip and release everyone in the church to do this in their own natural way. And I hope that you'll go away asking and thinking and praying about how you can be naturally supernatural in your life and also in your groups, but also as a church in general. We've really been on a journey of learning how to really applaud the have-a-goes and the tries and to just really celebrate everything. And if you are on that journey too, that just creates a space where people just feel empowered and encouraged to actually step out and make a difference and impact in the towns and the streets and the city where God has placed us. So we started looking at missional communities about 3 years ago. Some of you may have heard of missional communities. You may already be doing those in your church. Ours might look slightly different. Some missional communities kind of affect what happens on a Sunday, and maybe people don't meet. But I'm going to explain to you what it looks like for us. So we'd been running small groups for many, many years. And actually, although in some ways they'd been fairly successful in building a level of community with others in church, and they gave a context for discipleship, there were a number of issues that had come up with our small groups. So one of those issues was that we couldn't increase our number of groups above 28 within the church. So we were a growing church in our Sunday attendance when we got our own building, which was great. And we knew that with that growing attendance, we needed the number of small groups to be increasing to match that growth and to accommodate the new people coming in. But no matter how hard we tried, we just couldn't seem to get the number of groups over about 28-ish. We put it in the church goals, we trained on it, we sold vision for it, we trained on it a little bit more, but we just couldn't increase that number. If one group started, another 1 or 2 groups would close. We were just stuck. So we couldn't multiply. Also, the leaders really started to burn out. We were encouraging all our leaders to be multiplying their groups, but they just really seemed to struggle. And if new leaders emerged from within the group, they tended to take over from the leaders, and the leaders would then have a break and often never ever go back to leading a group. And so it just stayed the same rather than actually multiplying. And leaders that actually had managed to multiply maybe had 1 or 2 multiplications in them. And partly that was because they'd built relationships and deep relationships with this small group, and then they multiplied, and it was like saying goodbye to half of their family. And it just got too painful. So when they multiplied again, they just didn't go quite as deep as they would, just to protect their hearts. And they got to the point where they were like, I'm done, I'm burnt out, this isn't giving me life. So that was an issue, they were burning out. Also, the groups weren't missional. So they were very inward-looking, they were focused on personal growth and not really outward-looking. And we tried everything to try and motivate them. We had like a set of DNA that small groups had to kind of tick off and score themselves, and one of them was World and Local Mission, and it was always scored the lowest. We tried strategies such as giving every group £50 every term from the church and said, use this for mission. But often they just spent most of the time not being able to decide what to do with the money, so they didn't end up doing anything with it. So they just weren't missional. The leaders would cap the groups at about 10 to 12 people, partly due to relational capacity. You just can't have that many people that you're building intense, deep relationship with. And also space in houses. Most people didn't have living rooms that would accommodate 20-odd people. So we'd have new people coming, asking to join, and would just be told many, many times, no, we haven't got room in our group for you, which just didn't come across very welcoming, and we didn't want that. And also they looked a little bit like mini Sunday meetings. They would have a worship and welcome and worship and questions that we'd produce from the preach, and it just made it more of a meeting. And I don't know if I'm like you or you're like me, but I don't need any more meetings in my life. I'm meetinged out. So we had these kind of issues, and we just thought, okay, something needs to happen. So I was one of the people who was leading one of these small groups, and I'd been doing it for many years, and I'd started coaching the leaders, and we just thought, actually, we need to start addressing some of these issues and changing these things that were coming up for us. And we'd heard about St Thomas Crookes Church up in Sheffield, and they had seen 800 people in 1 year come and have contact with the church and move closer, or either make a commitment to Jesus in some way through their missional communities, which just seemed massive. We were like, we don't see anything like that. Like, this is totally worth investigating. I'm more of the unbelief, and I was like, that surely is not true. But I was definitely up for investigating it. So a team of us jumped in the car, travelled up to Sheffield, and spent a day with the guys there. And it was so fun, and we read all the missional community books we could possibly get our hands on, and we just started to pray about what was God saying to us at King's Arms, and what was this something that we were going to step into. And what we learned was about living this 3-dimensional life of up in out. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but I certainly hadn't heard of it, and so I'll quickly draw it for you if you've never heard of it. So we use it in the form of a play symbol. So we've got up at the top, that's all about our connection with God. It's about worship, it's about praying and about reading the word and just getting more and deeper in terms of our connection with God. You've got your in, it's all about your character and your community, all about becoming more like Jesus, that iron sharpening iron thing, and learning to be more and more like Jesus. And then you've got your out. That's all about discovering your calling. What are you here for? And what is God calling you to? And so we were learning that actually our lives should look 3-dimensional. Everyone's life should look 3-dimensional. And what was happening in Sheffield for missional communities was that their groups were modelling all 3 of those things. And we thought, okay, we need to have something of this 3-dimensional life in us, but also in our groups. And as we were researching this, this became clear, but also this other thing became very clear, that actually where I had thought missional communities were actually all about outreach, they were in fact all about discipleship. They had discipleship as their foundation. And actually the key to equipping a church to be missional wasn't just to put on great guest events, although that's a good thing to do. And it wasn't just to tell people over and over again, invite your non-Christian friends to this thing and invite your non-Christian friends to this thing, because actually most people didn't have, certainly for us, didn't have non-Christian friends to invite. But actually, if we were effectively discipling them, they would naturally be missional. This was massive for me. So I had always been really passionate about discipling people and growing others. And if I'm being really honest, I thought I was pretty good at it. I had people asking me all the time to disciple them, and I'd seen lots of people that I'd inputted, released into leadership and been seen as effective in their gifts. But as I was looking more into this and investigating more about this three-dimensional life and missional communities, God very gently but very clearly spoke to me. I remember even where I was sitting on that day, you have those times when God just pokes at you. Like, he's so gentle about it. I love him for that, but it was definitely very clear. But he said to me, do those you disciple look like Jesus, or do they look like you? I was literally stunned. I sat there being like, oh, okay. And when I thought about each one of them, I realized that although actually I'd done a really great job in imparting the strengths and gifts that I had in them, they didn't look three-dimensional like this, like Jesus looked like. My weakest area in this three-dimensional life, as actually as many Christians, would have been the out. This was my comfort zone. Actually, part of my role is I also lead worship. I love that. I love discipling, and this would have been my weakest area. I've often said I'm not an evangelist. Let the evangelists go out, see people saved, bring them in, and when they come into the church, I'll disciple them. That's great. That's totally what I can do. But you know what? I'd actually completely and utterly missed the point. So to be a disciple means to be a learner. And actually, we're all learning to be more like Jesus. And I'd just made mini-me's instead of taking Jesus' example for living as a son or daughter of the King. And I needed to be equipping them to look more like him and not like me. I was so humbled at that moment. And if I'm honest, I was also a little bit scared because I thought, this is totally out of my comfort zone. I do not know how to do that. But do you know what? I wanted to respond to God, and I wanted to live a three-dimensional life that lived like Jesus. And so as I realized the fact that if we have groups that were discipling effectively, then those groups would be naturally missional. And that actually the key thing was going to be that every person needed to discover how they could naturally be missional in the way that God had created them. They didn't need to fit into the mold of the evangelist that was standing there or whoever they'd seen do evangelism in the past. They needed to find out what it was for them that was natural for them to be able to be missional. So for us, we looked at addressing the problems that we had with our current groups, like I said, about not being missional and leaders burning out, and not being able to multiply groups. And we set about creating missional communities that were three-dimensional, that equipped everyone in all three of these areas, and that they actually discipled people well. So as we thought about starting missional communities and this whole area of the foundation of discipleship, we thought, actually, we need to make sure that people know how to disciple. Because people have been doing discipleship in small groups and doing some of it really well, but they weren't naturally missional. So we kind of went back to scratch and thought, okay, we're going to make and create our own discipleship language. So this is one of the tools that we have in our discipleship language. And they're just tools that are very easy for people to sit down, whether it be in the pub or wherever they are, and can kind of draw it on a napkin and just talk people through what it is to live a three-dimensional life. And we wanted it to be really accessible for anyone who was 9 years old all the way up to 90 years old, whether they were a new Christian or whether they were a more mature Christian, and that actually that would give a consistent foundation to discipleship in groups. So we were creating our discipleship language, and then we decided that if we would just try a couple of pilot groups of missional communities with some experienced group leaders, just to see if missional communities would work in our church. And the main things that we wanted to keep clear about what a missional community was that they needed to have all three of these elements in them. They needed to be centered around a common mission that was clear that people could sign up to. And they needed to have a rhythm that served the mission and the leaders. So what I mean by rhythm is like, what time does it meet, whether it's in the evening, whether it's in the day. If you want to reach out to reach parents who take their kids to the soccer game on a Saturday morning, there's no point in meeting on a Friday evening. You need to be meeting there on a Saturday. Does that make sense? So they needed to have a clear rhythm that served the mission and the leaders. The leaders needed to be leading out of a passion for that mission. And as much as they could, we encouraged them to meet outside of homes and outside of the church building. And the rest really was up to the leader of that group to be asking the question regularly, what is God saying to you, and what are you going to do about it? This meant for us having a low control but high accountability framework in what their group would look like. But actually what we found by having that, although that's a little bit scary sometimes, it's actually developed our leaders probably quicker than by following a rule book, because actually they found out that they need to be asking God and having dependence on God in how to lead and responding to him and trying things and thinking, this isn't quite working, okay, God, how do I change this? And making changes for themselves, leading it out of their own style rather than following a rule book. So this was a risk for us, but the reality was that if God was calling us this way, then it was completely worth the risk. So we started 2 groups, one whose leaders had a passion for reaching those in prison, and another group that would meet in a local pub looking to impact the lonely with the love of the Father. So we didn't announce these pilot groups from the front or anything, we kind of did it under the radar, but actually people started hearing about it, as you do in churches. News tends to spread quickly sometimes, and there seemed to be an excitement and buzz that grew as people were hearing about it, and they would come up to me and be like, I've heard this thing about missional communities, and I know it's under the radar, and tell me more about it, I want to know more about it. And loads of people were saying actually they wanted to either start one or join one or be part of one that was already going. So a few months later, we then started a couple more groups, like a group that was really passionate about reaching families, so they would meet in the day and gather families together. A group that was reaching the French-speaking community in Bedford, and another group that started going to the open mic night in town to build relationships and sing songs that they'd written themselves in that environment. And we just began to see a change in the culture where people were gathering together who had similar passions as them. And that people just really started enjoying going to the groups because they were doing things that either they would have been doing already, or they'd always wanted to do but never had the opportunity, or always wanted to do but always wanted to do it with someone else, and they got to do it as part of a team. And they just got to build a relationship with people both inside the church who had similar passions to them, but also they started building relationships with people outside of the church, and that was novel. That wasn't really happening. Each group looked completely different, but they definitely all consisted of this up, in and out. And one of the concerns that we had from the church as we were starting this was that people were worried that pastoral care was going to drop away, and if we were focused on mission, then actually there wouldn't be pastoral care within the groups. But in one of our groups, in the group that went to the open mic night, they had a guy there who he was a single dad. He didn't have his son living with him, and he'd never lived with his son. He'd lived with the mum that whole time, but they were going through a custody battle. And he actually got custody of this young son, and he did not know what to do. He was like, I need to know about discipline and food and schools and all that kind of stuff. And what happened was the missional community he was in, they stepped right up. They brought him meals. They had him round for play dates with their kids. They babysat for him on missional community nights so that he could still go. They prayed for him. They gave him information and encouragement, and they just loved him really, really well. And they just pastorally cared for him really well. And so actually where this was a concern that with missional communities that would be lost, it had actually increased. So we got to envision the church with the launch of missional communities with confidence that because discipleship was foundational in all these groups, pastoral care was definitely still there because we had this in very much at the centre, and that discipleship was going to be definitely foundational. But that also we were all called to live like Jesus, which is three-dimensionally. We communicated that if we disciple people effectively, they will naturally be missional, and that we're all called to bring the kingdom of God to those outside of the church. And that missional communities for us would give everybody a way to do this as part of a group, as well as being inputted and grown both spiritually and emotionally. So I love missional communities because the breadth of vision for them is so wide. So if you like football, you can start a missional community around football. Just start making a team and talking about it and gather people from outside the church who want to play football. If you're into golf, then gather other people who like playing golf and start doing that, but do it for the kingdom. If you like train spotting, literally it can be anything. Jesus loves train spotters. Gather them together. They need Jesus, and start impacting the kingdom in that way. It's literally for everyone. Do you know what? Everyone is passionate about something. You'll be passionate about something, and it won't be someone else's passion, but that's okay. He's given you that passion for the very reason for you to bring the kingdom in that area. So now our missional communities are reaching many different areas of our towns. Some have taken on geographical locations that just go into the community and spend time there and get to know people and pray for people, and they just meet with them and build a relationship. We've got groups of creative writers, we've got a book club, We've got groups that gather around food. We've got groups, as I say, going into the prison. We've got a group that goes into the local detention centre. We've got groups that are feeding the homeless. We've got groups reaching out on the streets to pray for people. We've got groups reaching the Filipino community, reaching the Muslim community in Bedford, guys who meet to play football or to play cards. We've got groups that reach students. And I'm having conversations at the moment with people who want to start groups around fostering and adoption and around crochet and knitting groups. And another lady that wants to start a group that reaches businessmen and women, amongst many others. Isn't it just, the breadth of it is just amazing and incredible. Like the possibilities are endless. Literally, it's endless. So we encourage everyone regularly to be asking the question, what is God saying to me, and what am I going to do about it? And then we help people through that process of starting a group. And what we found is that for people who would be like me, who would have discounted themselves from being able to see people come to know Jesus, actually that leaves them feeling empowered that they can bring the kingdom in their own natural way. So for me, I joined the book club missional community. I love reading. I'm reading all the time. Love reading novels. And we meet in a pub, and there's like about 11 or 12 of us that meet, but 4 of those people don't come to church. They've never been to church. They're friends of my work colleagues of my friend, and they come in, and we read this book over a couple of months, and each month we meet together and we chat about the book, and I just get to build a relationship with them. I get to do life with them. I get to ask how their week was. I get to let them see who I really am, and naturally see who I love. And I'm looking for opportunities with them to be able to bring Jesus into that situation. I'm looking for, if they say, I've got a headache today, thinking, okay, I'm going to pray for you. It's so much easier than I ever thought it would be. And it's great for me as I work in the Christian bubble of a church. Actually, sometimes that's really hard then to have anyone outside of the church to be bringing the kingdom with and to have relationship. But actually, I get to bring the kingdom just by being me and not by trying to look like someone else. So as this is a seminar, I'm going to get you to speak to each other. So I want you to speak to the person next to you, and I want you just to ask each other, so where are your contexts to be reaching those outside of the church? What is it that you're passionate about? And if you were going to start a missional community, what could you possibly do? Go. Move next to someone if you're not sitting next to someone. When do I have to finish?
1:30.
Holy macaroni. I thought I had an hour. Okay, give you 30 more seconds. Okay. Do you want to be drawing your conversations to a close? It's exciting, isn't it? All of you have got something that you're passionate about, and you've all got something to bring. There is an opportunity for you to impact your community with the kingdom of God, just with the things that you're passionate about. It's exciting. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to unpack a little bit, because we talk a lot about the kingdom and what that looks like. And I want to talk a little bit about the practicalities of what it looks like for the kingdom. Actually, do you know how to recognize the kingdom, and do you know how to be able to play your part in bringing it? There's loads, when you look through the Bible, there's loads of ways to describe the kingdom of God. And we decided that we wanted to have a little tool in our discipleship toolbox that would make it memorable for people to be able to remember what it is as the signs of the kingdom. And actually, as you read through Isaiah, we picked Isaiah, it's full of kingdom activity. And so we based our the discipleship tool and the signs of the kingdom around Isaiah 61. So I'll just quickly read it to you. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of the spirit of despair. I love that verse. You could camp out on that verse for years and never get bored. I love it. So we picked out 7 key themes from that verse. So when you go away from today, just reread it. And as I talk about these 7 signs of the kingdom, just be looking through that verse and asking God to be speaking to you about each one of those things. We talk about bringing the kingdom as turning up the brightness of the kingdom, as we're all called to be lights to take the light of Jesus into dark places. The kingdom's defined as the active rule and reign of God over all he has made, and this was actually Jesus' central message. He even taught us to pray, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, like we sang in that song. But what does it actually look like? Are we able to recognize it and know what our part is in bringing it? And I think that in the past, for me, being missional has either been miscommunicated or misunderstood. Certainly for me, it was misunderstood, especially for those whose their primary gifting is not evangelist. So pastors and teachers will often discount themselves from being missional because they think it's about just being the one who leads someone to Jesus. And that's definitely part of it, but it's not the only thing that is missional. So I hope today that you'll see that there are many signs and can also equip others who aren't here within your church to know that this can be true for them. Okay, so the first sign is his presence. Do you know that when you accepted Jesus in your heart, you became a carrier of his presence? You're an ambassador for the kingdom of heaven. When you're an ambassador, if I was an ambassador for the United Kingdom and I stood and went into the United States, wherever I stand is under the rule and reign of back home in the United Kingdom, over the rule and reign that's been set for me. I don't come under the rules and the legislation of the United States. I come under the rule and reign of what's happening in the United Kingdom. And that's the same for you. You're ambassadors of the kingdom. So wherever you stand becomes an environment of heaven. You're representing heaven in that space. He says that he will never leave you and he will never forsake you. You take him with you wherever you go. And that's not even by having to do anything special. That's just by being you. You're an ambassador because you're now a son or daughter of the king. And in that place, you have authority. You hold all the authority of heaven. And where his presence is, there is freedom. So this is why we actively encourage our missional communities to meet outside of homes and outside of the church building. Because when they go outside somewhere, they change the atmosphere just by being there. Because they take God's presence with them. Our group that meets in the pub with the open mic night, they do 3 weeks in a row in the pub, singing their songs, building relationships, and then one night in the month, they meet back in someone's home to do a bit more kind of worship and discipleship and that kind of stuff. And they just had their kind of in and up night at home. And they went back to the pub the following week, and the guy who runs the pub were like, where were you guys last week? There was something so different about it. Like, we love it when you're here. There just feels like a different atmosphere when you're here. That's Jesus. That's him, because they carry his presence wherever they go. We can make a difference just by getting out there. I'm convinced that people just need to encounter the presence of their Father to realize that he really loves them. He never intended for us to keep him within the four walls of the church. He intended us to come into the four walls of the church to get equipped to take him outside of the church where people have no idea about him yet. That was what he wanted us to do. So where is he asking you to take his presence? Just by being you. Where is he asking you to get off your couch or your pew and make a difference and change the atmosphere? Think outside of the church. Is it when you're at work on Monday morning? When you go to the gym, or when you're doing your Tesco shop? In all those places, you're taking his presence and you change the atmosphere there. Sometimes it's just as simple as actually remembering this and actually looking around at what is going on around you and knowing that you're making a difference because you carry his presence with you. And in that space, there's freedom. Freedom from fear, sickness, anxiety, and stress. And you know what? The world out there desperately needs that freedom. Nothing is impossible for him. So remember that you carry his presence, so expect to see miracles wherever you go, because for the one whom nothing is impossible is with you. I've had loads of people say to me, there's just something different about you. That's him. They're seeing him inside of me. Do you just need fresh revelation that he's with you, or fresh revelation that you're an atmosphere changer? It's not just the evangelists who carry his presence. We all do. It's for everyone. Okay, so second sign is justice. Wherever there is injustice, whether that be physical, emotional, financial, social injustice, we are called to bring justice. To see those that have been unloved experience love. To see those who can't stand up for themselves be given a voice. To see those who have been mistreated to be blessed and to be valued. Jesus was passionate about seeing those who couldn't stand up for themselves be given a voice. If you think about the woman that was dragged out to be stoned to death, he stood up and gave her a voice. She had no voice in that moment, and he stood up and stood in between them and was like, whoever here is without sin, cast the first stone. That was justice. He stood up for her and gave her a voice. She would have died if he hadn't have been there. We've got a number of groups that are seeking to bring justice. So we've got one of our groups that go into the local prison, and they started out just spending time on an evening with the prisoners, getting to spend time just listening to them, speaking truth to them, accepting them unconditionally. And once they've been doing that faithfully for a few months, the chaplain there asked them actually if they would like to lead the Sunday services, which was massive. They were like, oh, actually there's so much red tape around prisons to get in there. We were like, this is great. So they got to lead that service, they got to lead worship, they got to preach, they got to give the gospel, they got to pray for the sick. They were basically given free rein. It was so amazing. So they started doing that, and loads of people were coming to their services. And then they were like, actually, we're going to be bold. So one of the guys that's leading this group also is part of the leadership team of our Alpha courses. And they were like, I want to run an Alpha course in prison. I'm going to ask. So they went to the chaplain and they said, look, we would love to run an Alpha course. We can modify it into a 3-week course. Can we possibly do that on an evening? And they were like, yes. Go for it. They were like, whoa, this is amazing. So they started it. They started a prison Alpha course, and they've been running that now for probably about 18 months, over and over again. And they've seen so many people come through that course, so many people getting their questions answered, so many people that probably have never, ever encountered love get to come to a place, be loved by them, and therefore encounter the love of Jesus. We've had loads of people filled with the Holy Spirit. We've seen people got healed from sickness and get given the opportunity to know forgiveness and the opportunity for them that they can turn their life around. It's so exciting. This is the kingdom. Seeing those that have been judged as being a hopeless case being given the opportunity to live the life that Jesus intended for them from the beginning. Do you know what? Some of these guys that are in the prison, they could be the next church leader. They could be the next worship leader, but they need us to go out and give them that opportunity to encounter the one that loves them unconditionally. We've got another group whose main vision is to look for those who are lonely in the pub and invite them just to join them. They go and take games and they sit and have fun and build community and family there. And they just look out for anyone and they're like, okay, God, who here is lonely? Who needs to know family? And then they go over and say, hey, we're playing a game. We need an extra person. Do you want to come and sit with us? And it's easy. And most of the time they say yes. And they go and they play. And actually it's just about building relationship and them getting to encounter family at that time. That's the kingdom. We've got another group that provides meals for the homeless, and they just build family with them every Friday night. For some of those guys, they might not have been spoken to all week, and they know that in this time on the Friday night they can come in, there's no judgment, there's no, oh, you can't have been drinking, you can't have been doing this. They just get to come as they are and get asked how their day was and to be loved unconditionally. We've got another group that goes into the immigration detention centre, just spends time with the women there. Do you know what? They're often scared and lonely. They're away from their family. Some of them are fleeing from terrible situations. And their group just get to go and love them, give them acceptance, and tell them about the hope that they have in Jesus. So where are the opportunities to bring justice in your town or city? Who or where is he calling you or those in your church to bring justice? Okay, number 3, healing. Sign of the kingdom. We have got authority over all sickness, disease, and emotional brokenness. These things are all called to bow to the name of Jesus. This is what Jesus went around doing daily as he moved from town to town. He healed all kinds of diseases, and he even raised the dead. And then he said that we would do even greater things than him. I mean, what is greater than raising the dead? I don't even know what that looks like, but he said we're going to do that. And if what he says is true, and he always speaks the truth, then wherever I'm at on the journey of living out what he's called me to do, I need to start expecting that when I pray for the sick, I have all authority to see sickness go. So we're encouraging all of our groups, we're encouraging everyone across our church, but also people in groups, just to be looking for opportunities to pray for the sick. People out there are looking for miracles, and there's nothing like the power of God to change the most hardened of hearts. We had some people in a group that go out onto the streets, and they were just walking around and they were asking God, who do you want to bless today? And they saw 3 girls sitting over on a wall, and they just said, okay, God, what do you want to say to them? They felt like God said one of them has a bad back. So they mustered up their courage and they went over and they said, hello, I just wondered if any of you had a bad back. And one of the girls said, oh yeah, I do. So I'm like, yes, God, okay, great. So they said, oh, would it be, we're Christians, you know, we felt like God spoke to us about you, and we believe, and we've seen people healed of bad backs in the past. Can we pray? And she was like, yeah, sure. My back is bad because I've got one leg longer than the other. So they were like, okay, great. So they said, this guy said to her friend, actually, why don't you pray for her and pray to Jesus and say, would you grow the leg? So she was like, okay, sure. So he said, all you have to do is say, in Jesus' name, leg grow. She was like, okay. So she did it. Nothing happened. So he said, oh, that's okay. Sometimes it doesn't happen on the first go. Let's do it again. So she was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So she prayed for her friend again and said, Jesus, in the name of Jesus, leg grow. In front of their eyes, the leg grew. She was like, this is amazing. So the girl obviously got healed. That was great. And but then the girl who had prayed was like, so God spoke to you about her. Like, what does he want to say to me? Like, what does God want to say to me? And so they got the opportunity to pray for her, to prophesy over her, and tell her about church and Alpha. And do you know what? It's so much easier to tell someone about what God has for them when they're asking you for it. Like, that's so much easier. But it just took that act of courage of, one, going out and asking what was God saying, but also then going and being bold and saying, I think God's saying this for you. Is that right? It's so fun. There's another group that go out and they're building relationship with Pete the Burger Van Man. And as they've just been building relationship with him and saying hi to him, and he's shared with them that he has a bad leg. And so they've got to pray for him on many occasions and seen it dramatically improve. And they just get to love him each time they see him. And how's your leg doing? Oh no, that's good. Do you know what? People just feel loved when you offer to pray for them. Even if you don't see them healed, you can leave them feeling loved because you've noticed them, but also you can say that God has noticed them because he's spoken to you about them. Do you know what? Like Simon was saying, one of the barriers to this is dealing with disappointment. And can I encourage you just to be dealing with disappointment that's come up in the past? This would be true for me. So I've had a bit of a long-term back issue that's been about 4 years or so, and it's painful most of the time, but sometimes it's really, really painful. And I've been prayed for so many times. I've prayed so many times myself. And actually backs, I think backs was one of the first things we saw in King's Arms, wasn't it, being healed? And so we seem to see those all the time, and so I'm like, okay, yep, again, I'll be prayed for to be healed. And I haven't been healed, and I don't know why I haven't been healed, but actually it's been key for me to deal with my disappointment, because sometimes it is painful, and I think, okay, Why, God? But I need to process that with him and come back to, but you've still called us to see this. I don't know why there's the tension between the now and not yet. And I want it to be now, but I realize that some of it is not yet. But actually, I need to deal with my disappointment and still keep going after it. One of my heroes is a lady called Heidi Baker, and she's a missionary in Mozambique. And she had loads of prophetic words about seeing blind eyes open. And she apparently prayed for blind people for 2 years before she saw anyone's blind eyes open. 2 years. She must have been really good at dealing with her disappointment, because I'd have been disappointed. I would probably have done it for a few weeks and got really disappointed. But she carried on doing it for 2 years. There's a perseverance to this. So how do you feel about praying for the sick? Have you got some disappointment to work through? Do you need to ask Jesus for courage to pray for the next sick person that you see? This is the kingdom. This is the kingdom. So the next sign, 4, is salvation and deliverance. When the kingdom is being brought, we should expect to see salvation and deliverance. If we're seeing other signs of the kingdom, then this is gonna be happening and people are gonna get saved. You never know how close someone is to opening their heart to Jesus. And sometimes it just takes an act of courage on our part to be bold and ask the next question. So one of our groups, again, has been meeting in a pub, and a few months ago, they'd been making a relationship with a guy and building a relationship with him. And he just said to them, "What is it you guys do? Like, you seem to always come in together. Like, how do you know each other?" They were like, "Well, actually, we're part of a local church." And he was like, "Well, can I sit with you? Can I maybe be part of you?" And they were like, yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, come and do that. And they said, "Okay, you're going to be here next week." And they said, "Well, actually, next week we're going to be meeting in our home because we just like to get together and pray together and stuff." And he was like, "Oh, can I come to that?" They were like, "Sure, okay, yeah, you can totally come to that." So the leaders of the group were like, "Oh, do we change what we were going to do? We were going to pray and prophesy over each other, we were going to worship." And they just felt like God was like, "No, do exactly what you would normally do." So he came along to their group, they worshipped, they worked through one of the discipleship tools, and started praying and prophesying over each other, and they were all praying, and then this little voice from the new guy prayed out and said, "Jesus, I've never spoken to you before, but I'm so thankful for these people." I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. So now he's part of that group. He's on a journey of learning what it is, and to wherever he's out on his journey of becoming a Christian. But it's like that thing of belonging before they believe. That's what I want to see. I want people drawn into a relationship, and it's a journey. Sometimes we can make the steps so big from making a commitment to, okay, now you've got to come into church, be part of a group, tithe, do all the blah, blah, blah. It's like, actually, it's a journey. I'm so excited that this guy feels like he's found family, and they get the opportunity to impact him week after week after week. Do you know what? Jesus is the biggest seeker out there, and he's really attractive. So we can be really bold in showing him off to people and showing who Jesus really is, and trust that God will soften the hardest hearts with his incredible love. So do you feel equipped and ready to be bold in leading someone to Jesus? Okay, next sign is peace. Peace is powerful. Sometimes I think we can underestimate peace. I've heard people get disappointed when they've prayed for people and all that they've received or seem to feel is peace. But with all the stress out there in the world, with all the questions that people have, the pressures of work and life and family, peace is actually a very much needed thing that is actually quite rarely felt out there in the world. And Jesus doesn't just promise us any old peace. He doesn't promise us a peace that's dependent on us or our circumstances, but he offers us a peace that goes beyond our understanding, that cuts through everything else. What else out there can offer that? There's nothing. There's nothing else. And when you feel peace, you have the space to breathe and to rest and to think. Again, in our prison missional community, one of the prisoners there, they were building a relationship with him, and one evening he was sharing a cell with someone who must have already been a Christian, I think. Anyway, one evening he got his cellmate's Bible, and he was laying on the bed, and this guy was like the guy that would punch your head in and all that kind of stuff. really angry guy. He started to read the Bible, and he was reading it, and he said, I was getting so frustrated, I couldn't understand it. I was reading it, and it didn't make any sense to me. Anyway, he said he just dropped the Bible onto his chest. And he said, as he did, a peace came over him that he'd never felt it before. It was so tangible. He said, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what was going on. And in that moment, that was what made him give his life to Jesus. In that moment, he just gave his life to Jesus. It was experiencing the peace of God in the midst of his frustration and pain and anger that made him give his life to Jesus. Then he came along to the Alpha course that they run, and he would tell them week after week, he said, do you know what, every time I walk in the door of where we're having Alpha, I just feel peace. It's like a peace. It's way better than the drugs I used to do and the alcohol that I used to have. This is ridiculous. I love it. And the missional community guys had just been really praying for peace. They'd been creating an environment of peace. Peace is so powerful. I try and do this wherever I am. I was out the other night for someone's birthday in an Indian restaurant, and we were sitting there, and it was quite quiet. And in the corner was a couple that came in, one guy who was obviously off his face on something with this woman, and he was being quite loud and abusive to her, really, and telling her to F off, and don't you tell me what to do. And the people in the restaurant, the servers were coming over, and he was like, go away, go away. Interestingly enough, the other people on my table didn't even notice that it was happening. It was so bizarre. Anyway, I totally knew it was happening. And so in that moment, I was like, okay, Jesus, what can I do? I was feeling a little bit fearful, if I'm honest. And just felt like him say, pray for peace. Release peace. Whatever is here right now is not peaceful. Release the opposite. So I just sat there and I was like, okay, just release your peace, Jesus. Release your peace. Anyway, eventually, the guy just decided to get up and leave. And I was like, actually that, and then we had the conversation on the table where I was like, did you see that? They were like, no, didn't see that. I was like, oh my goodness, it looked awful. Anyway, but that was me bringing the kingdom in that environment. It doesn't matter where you go, you can bring peace. Anyone can bring peace. It's incredibly powerful. This is how simple it is to bring the kingdom wherever you go. So where have you been recently that needed peace? Who have you come across that could just do with experiencing the peace of God? Okay, next sign, number 6, comfort. Like peace, comfort is so desperately needed in this world. One of our missional communities meets in a local coffee shop, and one of its members was there having coffee when a lady went past her table with a walking stick and was looking ever so wobbly as she was sitting down. And this person from the missional community said, are you okay? And the lady then replied, oh, it's peace at last. This is my only day off as I care for my mother who's got dementia. My mother-in-law died recently, and I've just come from bereavement counselling. What an answer to the question, are you okay? So this lady from the missional community asked if she would like to sit with her, and she said yes. So she sat down and talked with her for 2 hours. She got to share with her, she got to love with her, and she eventually got to pray for her. Do you know what? She brought comfort to someone who was mourning, who was exhausted and probably incredibly lonely, all through just asking if she was okay and being willing to give up a couple of hours of her time to spend time with her. Do you know what? I think if Jesus was there, that's exactly what he would have done. Exactly what he would have done. He listened to people, he let them talk, and he comforted them and loved them just where they were at. Comfort is powerful. Bringing comfort to someone is bringing the kingdom. So where can you bring comfort to those who are desperately in need of comfort? Okay, number 7. You guys tracking with me? You still with me? Okay, good. Joy. Do you know that the joy of the Lord is your strength? Joy is so powerful. If you've read the news lately, read the newspapers, heard stats about depression and anxiety, we are living in a world that desperately needs to know joy. And it's actually really easy to bring joy to people out there. It could come by just giving them an encouraging word at the checkout, or thanking the barista at Starbucks for the brilliant job that he did with his coffee. That's what I do all the time. Complimenting someone on that they look beautiful today. When someone does that to you, doesn't it make you feel joyful? Doesn't it brighten up your day? And it's easy to do it. We just need to take the time in our busy lives to think, how can I encourage them? How can I bring joy to them? Ask God to be opening your eyes to who and what is around you, and then say what you see out loud. So I just try and do this whenever I'm in a queue to pay for something. I'm trying to be thinking, what can I say to the girl who's behind the checkout, who's probably been working for the last 7 hours and may not have had a break? How can I brighten her day? How can I bring her joy today? And it could be that very thing that potentially opens up a conversation for me that could lead anywhere. Remember, the possibilities are endless. It's that small act of bringing encouragement and joy in that moment that could lead to her salvation. You never know. So one of our missional communities runs our regular Alpha course. And on the first evening of the last course, they were feeling really under pressure to make stuff happen on this night and see people saved. But as they got together and prayed beforehand as the team, they just felt like God reminded them of the truth that it's about carrying the kingdom, and that they just needed to be refilled with the joy of the Lord. And that as that overspilled in them, people would naturally encounter God. So they prayed and worshipped, they got filled up with joy, they felt the pressure lift off, and actually they had a great first Alpha night. And they chatted with loads of guests, and some of them were saying at the end that they weren't sure whether they had wanted to come. They were kind of unsure on the fence whether they wanted to come. But actually they were so glad that they had, because of the light atmosphere that they had felt, and that actually they were definitely coming back next time. They'd really enjoyed themselves. They'd encountered joy. And the team was so glad. They were just like, yes, we heard God and we brought joy. It was over that overspill of knowing joy for themselves that they could spread joy that evening. So these are the 7 signs: his presence, justice, healing, salvation and deliverance, peace, comfort, and joy. So which one of these comes most naturally for you? I guarantee that there'll be one of these that you think, actually, that one is really easy. I'd probably do that most of the time without noticing. Is it that you're the peace bringer and you find yourselves in situations of chaos and anxiety? If you're always walking into places and you think, why is this kicking off here and why is this kicking off? Maybe because you're the very person to bring peace. Maybe you're the very person. No one else on my table when I was having dinner noticed that was going on. I'm a peace bringer. I can bring peace to that situation. That's me bringing the kingdom. Are you the one who spots someone who's having a hard day and needs to comfort them through encouragement? Are you the one that seems to see people on crutches or be faced with people who are sick all the time? Maybe you're the one that needs to ask for courage to pray for them. Or are you the one that has people open up and tell you their whole life story? What's natural for you? If we can start helping people discover what they can do naturally and keep encouraging them to take opportunities to do this, they will start seeing God do amazing things, and that will encourage them to then start getting bolder and stepping out in areas that don't feel quite so natural. So as you do it and you're encouraging people on this journey, start applauding the tries and the have-a-goes. Celebrate everything. And actually, instead of separating the pastors and evangelists, why don't we look at what their natural gifts are and how they complement each other to bring the kingdom? And that actually we need both to be playing their part for the kingdom. The kingdom is for everyone to be able to bring. No one is discounted. You're all sons and daughters of the King. I'm super aware that I've gone over time, but can I quickly pray? Is that all right? Okay, great.